What if death wasn't an end, but a doorway to something far stranger? Picture this: a loved one's body carefully arranged in a seated position, their skin adorned with bright red ochre, as if ready for a feast in the afterlife. Or perhaps their remains are left high on a mountaintop, exposed to the elements and scavenging birds, believed to be the purest form of liberation. These aren't scenes from a fantasy novel, they're real rituals practiced by ancient cultures, each one a window into how humanity has wrestled with the great unknown. Death, the one experience we all share, has inspired some of the most bizarre, beautiful, and unsettling traditions in history. And today, we're unraveling 30 of the most extraordinary burial practices ever recorded, each one more surprising than the last. Think about how we honor the dead today: flowers, quiet ceremonies, maybe an engraved headstone. But centuries ago, things were far from ordinary. Some cultures mummified their deceased with honey, turning them into sweet preserves for eternity. Others buried their loved ones with live servants, believing they'd need company in the next world. There were even those who feared the dead might return, leading to rituals designed to keep them firmly in their graves. Why did these practices vary so wildly? Because every civilization had its own answer to life's biggest question: what happens when we're gone? Whether it was reverence, fear, or a desire to keep the departed close, these rituals reveal the deepest hopes and anxieties of the people who practiced them. So let's step into the shadows of history together. We'll explore sky burials in Tibet, where bodies are returned to nature in the most literal way. We'll uncover the mystery of self-mummifying monks in Japan, who spent years preparing for their own deaths with a rigor that borders on the unbelievable. And we'll see how some cultures turned mourning into an art form, with elaborate tombs, ghost marriages, and even dances with the dead. This isn't just a list of strange customs, it's a journey through humanity's most profound and creative responses to mortality. By the end, you might just see death in a whole new light. So settle in, because the stories we're about to share will challenge everything you thought you knew about the final farewell. High in the thin air of the Himalayas, where the sky feels close enough to touch, Tibetan Buddhists perform one of the most striking death rituals the world has ever known. Known as Jeta, or sky burial, this practice transforms the act of saying goodbye into something profoundly connected to nature. Imagine a loved one's body carried up winding mountain paths to a sacred open-air platform, where vultures, considered celestial beings, descend to carry the remains into the heavens. To outsiders, it might seem startling, even unsettling, but to those who follow this tradition, it's the purest form of generosity, a final act of giving back to the cycle of life. The ritual begins with careful preparation. Monks chant prayers to guide the soul toward liberation, while the body is cleansed and arranged in a fetal position, symbolizing the return to beginnings. Then the Rojiapas, or body breakers, perform their sacred duty, ensuring every part is accessible to the waiting birds. What remains after the vultures have finished bones too tough to consume are ground into powder and mixed with barley flour, so even the last traces nourish other creatures. Nothing is wasted, nothing lingers. This complete dissolution echoes a core Buddhist teaching. The body is merely a vessel, temporary and insignificant compared to the eternal journey of the soul. Why choose such a dramatic farewell? In Tibet's harsh, rocky terrain, digging graves is nearly impossible, and with timber scarce, cremation is reserved for high lamas. But practicality isn't the only reason. Sky burials embody the principle of impermanence, a reminder that clinging to physical forms is futile. While modern cultures often preserve bodies in sealed caskets or scatter ashes in keepsake urns, this ritual embraces decay as natural and even holy. The vultures, far from being seen as scavengers, are called sky chariots, lifting the departed toward enlightenment. The contrast with contemporary funerals couldn't be starker. Where Western traditions often shield mourners from death's visceral reality, embalming fluids, padded caskets, manicured cemetery lawns, sky burials demand unflinching acceptance. There's no polished headstone to visit, no preserved body to view. Instead, mourners witness transformation firsthand, a raw and beautiful testament to life's fleeting nature. Yet both customs share the same underlying purpose, honoring the dead in ways that bring comfort to the living. Whether through whispered prayers at a graveside or the silent flight of vultures against the Himalayas, every culture finds its own language for grief. Perhaps what's most remarkable is how this ancient practice challenges our deepest assumptions. In a world where we fight to delay aging, where death is so often hidden behind hospital curtains, the sky burial offers a radical alternative, a surrender to nature's rhythms. It asks us to consider, what if letting go completely isn't loss but liberation? Long before the pyramids rose from the Egyptian sands, a coastal people along the arid edges of Chile and Peru were perfecting the art of eternal preservation. The Chinchoro didn't just bury their dead, they transformed them into stunning works of art. Picture a loved one's body carefully taken apart, their skin peeled away like delicate parchment, their bones cleaned and reinforced with sticks. The hollowed form would then be stuffed with reeds and clay, molded back into human shape before being wrapped in layer after layer of vibrantly dyed textiles. The final touch, a coat of glossy black or deep red paint, giving the mummy an almost otherworldly sheen. These weren't just corpses, they were masterpieces meant to endure for millennia. What's truly astonishing is how early this began. While the Egyptians started mummifying their pharaohs around 2600 BCE, the Chinchoro were preserving their dead as early as 5000 BCE, making them the earliest known practitioners of artificial mummification. But unlike the Egyptians, who reserved the practice for elites, the Chinchoro mummified everyone, men, women, children, even infants. This reveals something profound about their worldview. For them, death wasn't a divider separating the honored from the forgotten. It was a thread weaving every member of the community into the fabric of eternity. The colors they chose tell their own story. Some mummies gleam with black manganese, while others are coated in red ochre. Archaeologists suspect these hues weren't random. Black may have symbolized death's inevitability, a stark reminder of decay's transformative power. Red, on the other hand, might have represented life's vitality, a hope that energy persisted beyond the grave. There's even evidence that certain colors corresponded to how the person died, perhaps a way to honor their unique journey. But why go to such extraordinary lengths? The answer lies in the Chinchoro's deep connection to their ancestors. In a landscape where water was scarce and survival precarious, the dead weren't gone, they were ever-present guides. By preserving their physical forms, the living maintained a tangible link to the past. Imagine a family gathering around a mummified elder, seeking wisdom or blessings. These weren't relics to hide away, they were active participants in daily life, their painted faces watching over new generations. Modern cultures often seal death away, treating it as something to be managed quietly by professionals. The Chinchoro did the opposite. Their mummies were made by hand with painstaking care by the very people who loved them. This intimate involvement with death wasn't morbid, it was an act of devotion. Today, as scientists study these ancient bundles, they're not just uncovering techniques, they're decoding an entire philosophy. one that whispers across 7,000 years. To remember is to keep alive. For the Vikings, death wasn't an ending, it was a launch into the next great adventure. Picture a mighty longship, its prow carved with snarling beasts, pulled ashore one final time. Inside, a warrior lies surrounded by everything they might need for the journey ahead. A sword at their side, a shield at their feet, golden arm rings glinting in the firelight. Some ships held even more startling companions, horses, dogs, or even servants, all sacrificed to accompany their master into the afterlife. Then, with a torch's touch, the vessel would become a blazing beacon, lighting the way to Valhalla. This was no ordinary funeral. It was a spectacle of fire and faith, a ritual as bold as the people who practiced it. The ship itself was more than just a tomb. To the Norse, it represented passage, a vessel capable of crossing not just oceans, but the boundary between worlds. Some burials, like the famous Oseberg ship in Norway, were buried intact beneath mounds, their treasures hidden like time capsules. Others were set adrift in flames, their smoke curling upward as an offering to the gods. Either way, the message was clear: death was a voyage, and only the well-prepared would reach their destination. What's especially striking is how these rituals reflected Viking values. Warriors were buried with weapons, not just as tools, but as proof of their courage. A king might be clad in full armor, his face hidden behind a gleaming helm, as if ready to fight alongside Odin when the final battle came. Even everyday items, combs, cooking pots, gaming pieces, were included, suggesting the afterlife wasn't some distant paradise, but a continuation of life's pleasures and struggles. But perhaps the most haunting detail is the presence of sacrificed animals and, in some cases, people. At sites like Sutton Hoo in England, archaeologists have found ships surrounded by the bones of horses, their reins still decorated with silver. In rare instances, servants or thralls were buried alongside their masters, possibly volunteers who believed serving in death was an honor. While unsettling today, this practice reveals a brutal yet profound logic. Loyalty didn't end at death. Modern funerals often focus on peace, quiet cemeteries, gentle hymns. Viking send-offs were anything but quiet. They were loud, fiery, and unapologetically bold, a celebration of a life lived fiercely. When a ship burned, the crowd would have felt the heat on their faces, smelled the tar and timber, heard the crackle of flames swallowing the sails. It wasn't just a goodbye, it was a spectacle meant to match the intensity of the departed spirit. This ritual also hints at the Vikings' unique view of honor. Dying old in bed wasn't the goal, falling in battle was. A ship burial wasn't just about reaching the afterlife, it was about arriving in style worthy of songs and sagas. Even now, centuries later, these graves still tell stories. The way a sword is positioned, the choice of offerings, the care taken with each detail, all whisper the same fierce belief. How you say goodbye matters as much as how you live. And so the longships sail on, not in water, but in memory. Each burial mound is a message carved in wood and iron, a challenge to the living. When your time comes, will you be ready to embark? Perched high on the cliffs of southern China, where mist curls around jagged limestone peaks, wooden coffins cling to the rock face like silent sentinels of the past. These are the hanging coffins of the ancient Bow people, some suspended by ropes that have long since turned to dust, others wedged into narrow crevices or balanced on wooden beams hammered straight into the stone. To stand beneath them is to feel a dizzying mix of awe and unease. Why would anyone go to such lengths to place their dead where even the living would struggle to reach? The answer lies in the Bow's profound reverence for the sky. By elevating their loved ones, they believed they were delivering them closer to the heavens, far from the disturbances of the earthly realm. There was practicality in the poetry, too. In a land where fertile soil was scarce and predators roamed, cliffs offered protection, not just for the dead, but for their belongings. Grave robbers would think twice before scaling sheer rock faces to disturb a resting place. The coffins themselves, carved from single hollowed-out logs, were often filled with personal treasures, delicate pottery, bronze jewelry, even remnants of silk. Each one was a time capsule, carefully sealed against the centuries. But the real mystery isn't the why, it's the how. Some of these coffins weigh hundreds of pounds, yet they perch on cliffsides so steep that modern climbers need ropes and harnesses to access them. Archaeologists have puzzled over the methods used 3,000 years ago. Were they lowered from above with ropes, hoisted from the ground using pulley systems lost to time? Or did the bow carve hidden pathways into the rock now eroded away? The truth may never be fully known, but one thing is certain: this was no haphazard effort. The precision of their placement speaks to meticulous planning and deep communal effort. The symbolism here is as layered as the cliffs themselves. In many cultures, height represents spiritual ascent. Think of the pyramids of Egypt or the step temples of Mesoamerica. For the bow, the cliffs weren't just a physical elevation, they were a bridge between worlds. Even the coffin's positioning tells a story. Some face east toward the rising sun and rebirth. Others overlook rivers, perhaps to guide souls on their journey. The dead weren't hidden away, they were given a vantage point, forever watching over the valleys below. Today, the bow people are gone, their language and customs faded into history, but their coffins remain, defying gravity and time. Wind and rain have worn some to splinters, while others stand eerily intact, their wood still bearing the marks of ancient tools. They're a testament to humanity's endless creativity in the face of mortality, a reminder that every culture grapples with the same universal question, yet answers it in ways as unique as the landscapes they inhabit. To look up at these suspended tombs isn't just to see a burial practice, it's to witness a dialogue with eternity, carved into the very bones of the earth. In the flickering glow of a funeral pyre, a widow steps forward, her hands steady, her gaze fixed on the flames. This was Sati, an ancient Hindu practice where widows chose, or were compelled, to join their husbands in death by self-immolation. To modern eyes, it's almost incomprehensible, a brutal collision of devotion and despair. Yet for centuries, this ritual was woven into the fabric of certain communities, celebrated as the purest expression of a wife's loyalty. The word Sati itself means virtuous woman, and in its ideal form it was seen not as an end, but as a transcendence, a final, fiery union with the one she loved. But behind the symbolism lay a far darker reality. Historical accounts reveal that many Sati acts were far from voluntary. Widows in some regions faced unbearable pressure, ostracization, financial ruin, or even physical force. In a society where a woman's identity was often tied to her husband, life after his death could mean losing everything: status, security, even the right to raise her own children. Some saw Sati as the only escape from a future of poverty and scorn. Others were pushed onto the pyre by relatives eager to avoid the burden of supporting them or to seize their inheritance. The line between choice and coercion was often dangerously blurred. The ritual's roots stretched deep into Hindu scripture, where a handful of ancient texts mention women entering the fire as a gesture of fidelity. Over time, these rare episodes were mythologized, held up as the ultimate standard of wifely virtue. By the medieval period, Sati had become a cultural ideal in some communities, especially among royalty and the elite. A widow who performed it was glorified, her name etched into temples, her act immortalized in ballads. But for every celebrated case, countless others were forgotten, their stories lost to the smoke. British colonial rulers outlawed Sati in 1829, horrified by its brutality. Yet bans couldn't erase centuries of conditioning. Isolated cases surfaced sporadically, often in remote villages where tradition held sway over law. Even today, the debate lingers: was Sati an act of oppression or agency? Some argue it reflected a woman's right to choose her own fate, however extreme. Others see it as the inevitable result of a system that left widows with no good options. The truth likely lies somewhere in between, tangled in the complex web of faith, fear, and societal expectation. What's undeniable is the practice's haunting legacy. It forces us to confront how far cultures will go in the name of duty, and how easily reverence can tip into cruelty. Sati wasn't just about death. It was about control, memory, and the crushing weight of "what will people say?" While most of the world has moved on, the echoes of those funeral chants remain a cautionary tale about the price of blind tradition. And as the smoke clears, we're left with a question that transcends time. When does devotion become destruction? The next ritual takes us to the opposite end of the spectrum, where death wasn't met with flames, but with quiet, meticulous preparation. In the misty mountains of Japan, a group of monks embarked on a grueling path to self-mummification, turning their own bodies into sacred relics. Their story is one of discipline, endurance, and a pursuit of enlightenment so fierce it defies the limits of human will. In the quiet, waterlogged depths of northern Europe's peat bogs, time stands still. Here, the earth holds secrets, bodies so perfectly preserved that their fingernails, hair, and even the wrinkles on their skin remain intact centuries after death. These are the Bog Bodies, eerie relics of the Iron Age, their faces frozen in silent screams, their stories whispered only by the acidic waters that cradled them. Unlike the carefully prepared mummies of Egypt or the charred remains of Viking pyres, these individuals weren't laid to rest with ceremony. They were plunged into the wetlands, their bodies transformed into something between human and artifact, tanned by tannins like leather. The condition of these corpses is nothing short of astonishing. Take Toland man, discovered in Denmark with a noose still draped around his neck, his expression so peaceful he might have been sleeping. Or Lindo man, found in England with his skull fractured, throat slit, and limbs bound, a victim of what archaeologists believe was a ritualistic triple death. The bog's unique chemistry, low in oxygen but rich in sphagnum moss, halts decay, leaving skin darkened and contracted, yet eerily lifelike. Even their last meals linger in their stomachs, traces of gruel, berries, or in some cases hallucinogenic plants, hinting at ceremonies shrouded in mystery. But why were they here? The evidence paints a grim picture. Many show signs of deliberate violence: rope burns, deep cuts, crushed skulls, suggesting these weren't accidents or casual murders. Some scholars argue they were criminals, executed and dumped as warnings. Others see them as offerings to gods of fertility or the underworld, given to the bogs as payment for good harvests or victory in battle. The placement of the bodies deepens the intrigue. Some were pinned down with wooden stakes as if to prevent their return. Others were carefully arranged, their poses almost ceremonial. The bogs themselves were sacred spaces to ancient Celtic and Germanic tribes, liminal zones between land and water, life and death. To deposit a body here wasn't just disposal, it was an act of communion with the divine. The victims, often young, healthy, and sometimes bearing signs of high status, may have been chosen as messengers to the gods. Their deaths, though brutal, might have been seen as honorable, even desirable. Imagine a community watching as a chosen one walked into the mist, believing their sacrifice would ensure the tribe's survival. Modern forensics can reconstruct how these people died, but their voices are lost to time. Were they willing participants or victims of a society that demanded the unthinkable? The answer likely varies, as diverse as the cultures that practiced these rites. What's undeniable is the intimacy of their preservation. Unlike stone monuments or gold-laden tombs, bog bodies confront us with humanity itself: the curve of a smile, the callus on a hand, the frayed edge of a woolen cloak. They're not symbols of power, but snapshots of real lives, cut short in ways we're still struggling to understand. Standing before them in museums today, it's impossible not to feel a jolt of connection across the millennia. These aren't just artifacts, they're people, their stories etched not in words, but in wounds and weathered skin. The bogs gave them a kind of immortality, but it's a haunting one, a reminder that violence and devotion have always been tangled together in humanity's quest to make sense of the unknown. And perhaps that's their final lesson, that the past is never truly past, just waiting beneath the surface, ready to rise again when we're willing to listen. High atop the sun-baked hills of ancient Persia, silent stone towers rose against the skyline, structures not for the living but for the dead. These were the Towers of Silence, where Zoroastrians practiced one of history's most striking burial rites. Imagine a body carried by mourners up winding paths, laid bare on a circular platform, then left to the mercy of the elements and the swift descent of vultures. Within hours, only bones remained, bleached white by the sun. To outsiders, it might seem harsh or even grotesque, but for followers of Zoroastrianism, this was the ultimate act of reverence, a way to honor the sacredness of the earth itself. At the heart of this ritual was a profound belief in purity. Fire, water, and soil were considered holy in Zoroastrian teachings, too sacred to be defiled by decay. Burial would contaminate the ground, cremation would sully the flames, and even submersion in water was unthinkable. The solution: exposure. By placing bodies atop these towers, called dakmas, the community ensured decomposition happened cleanly, efficiently, and at a remove. Vultures, nature's most efficient scavengers, were seen as divine instruments, carrying away impurity on their wings. Once the flesh was gone, the bones would dry in the relentless Persian sun before being collected and placed in ossuaries, often mixed with lime to hasten their return to dust. The towers themselves were marvels of intentional design. Built on elevated ground, their concentric circles separated men, women, and children, each group laid to rest in their own ring. High walls shielded the site from the living below, preserving dignity while allowing the work of nature to proceed unseen. This wasn't abandonment, it was a carefully orchestrated partnership with the natural world. Even the vultures were protected by law. Harming one was a crime, for they were the silent guardians of the community's spiritual health. But what's truly fascinating is how this practice shaped Zoroastrian views of life and death. Unlike cultures that feared the dead or sought to preserve their physical forms, Zoroastrians saw the body as a temporary vessel. Once empty, it held no sanctity. The soul, they believed, lingered near the body for 3 days before departing, so speed was essential. The faster the remains were cleansed, the sooner the soul could begin its journey toward judgment. This urgency reflects a broader philosophy, that morality lies in actions, not in clinging to what's already gone. Modern Zoroastrians still uphold these traditions where possible, though urbanization and dwindling vulture populations have forced adaptations. In Mumbai, for example, solar concentrators now aid the process where birds no longer can. Yet the core principle remains unchanged, a radical acceptance of mortality's physical reality, paired with unwavering respect for the living world. In an era where death is so often sanitized or hidden, the Towers of Silence stand as a bold counterpoint, a reminder that how we handle the departed speaks volumes about how we value the earth we share. Perhaps what lingers most is the contrast with our own customs. Where many cultures fight decay with embalming fluids or sealed caskets, Zoroastrians embraced it as a necessary, even sacred, transformation. Their ritual wasn't about avoiding death's inevitability, but about meeting it with clear-eyed practicality and ecological grace. The towers may be silent, but their message echoes across centuries. Purity isn't the absence of death, it's the wisdom to let go. In the dim candlelight of a 16th-century chapel, a skeleton draped in silk and jewels gazes down from an ornate altar. Its hollow eye sockets gleam with emeralds, its finger bones clutch golden goblets, and its ribcage is encased in a gown fit for royalty. This was no macabre art project, it was a catacomb saint, one of thousands of anonymous skeletons plucked from Rome's underground tombs and transformed into objects of veneration. During the Protestant Reformation, when the Catholic Church faced fierce criticism over its relics, these forgotten bones became powerful tools of faith and theater. The practice began with a simple problem. Europe's churches were desperate for holy remains. Relics had long been central to Catholic worship, believed to connect the living with the divine. But as Protestant reformers mocked the trade in fake relics like the 12 heads of John the Baptist, circulating at the time, the church needed authentic links to the past. The solution lay beneath Rome, where miles of catacombs held countless skeletons from early Christian persecutions. Though no one knew their names or stories, their mere presence in those sacred tunnels marked them as martyrs. So began a strange alchemy. Teams of nuns and artisans carefully cleaned each bone, wrapped them in wire, then adorned them with rubies, pearls, and intricate lace. Some were posed holding weapons symbolizing their martyrdom. Others wore wax masks molded into serene expressions, as if death had merely paused their devotion. What's startling isn't just the extravagance, it's the psychological genius behind it. In an era when most parishioners couldn't read, these saints became living, or rather, undying storybooks. A skeleton draped in armor might represent a warrior for Christ. One crowned with gems could embody the heavenly rewards awaiting the faithful. The Church understood something profound. Awe is a powerful teacher. By making the abstract tangible, turning the idea of martyrdom into a glittering, jewel-encrusted reality, they gave people something to love, fear, and ultimately believe in. But the line between reverence and spectacle was thin. In some towns, these saints became local celebrities, paraded through streets during festivals. Wealthy patrons competed to fund the most lavish displays, turning devotion into a kind of sacred fashion show. Critics, even within the church, worried the practice bordered on idolatry. Yet for many, these saints bridged an impossible gap between the distant glory of ancient martyrs and the daily struggles of ordinary believers. To kneel before a catacomb saint wasn't just prayer, it was an encounter with someone who'd endured the worst and still triumphed. Today, these saints remain as unsettling as they are fascinating. Museums display them behind glass, their finery faded but still dazzling. Scholars debate whether they were acts of devotion or desperation, art or propaganda. But perhaps their true legacy is simpler, a reminder that faith has always demanded creativity. When words fail, we turn to symbols, even if those symbols are skeletons in diamond diadems, whispering across centuries that death isn't the end, but a doorway draped in gold. Deep in the snow-locked mountains of northern Japan, a monk kneels in a stone chamber barely wider than his shoulders, his breath slow and deliberate as he chants his final prayers. Outside, his disciples seal the entrance with earth and stone, leaving only a slender bamboo tube for air. This isn't a tomb, it's a portal. For the next 1,000 days, he will meditate in total darkness, his body slowly shutting down until death arrives. But if his preparations were perfect, his remains won't decay. Instead, they'll become Sokushinbatsu, a living Buddha preserved for eternity. This was the path of the self-mummifying monks of Yamagata, a practice so arduous that only 24 are known to have succeeded across 1,000 years. The process began long before entombment, with a diet so extreme it defies modern understanding. For 3 years, monks ate only pine needles, resin, and bark. Foods believed to purge the body of moisture and fat, the very elements that invite decay. Next came a grim 3-year phase, drinking toxic tea made from the sap of the oroshi tree, the same lacquer used to waterproof bowls. It caused violent vomiting and sweating, further dehydrating the tissues, while its poisons made the body unpalatable to insects. Finally, the monk would enter his tiny underground cell, assuming the lotus position with a bell in hand. Each day, he rang it once to signal he still lived. When the ringing stopped, his followers waited another 1,000 days before unsealing the chamber. If the body remained intact, the monk had achieved his ghastly triumph. If not, well, history doesn't record their names. Why would anyone choose this excruciating path? The answer lies in Shugendo, an ascetic Buddhist tradition that saw suffering as a ladder to enlightenment. These monks weren't seeking death, they were chasing immortality of a different kind. By halting decay, they aimed to transcend the cycle of rebirth, becoming eternal guardians for their communities. Their mummies were dressed in robes, seated in temples, and revered as vessels of divine power able to answer prayers and ward off disasters. In a world where most sought to avoid death, they embraced it with such control that death itself seemed to retreat. The contrast with other mummification practices couldn't be starker. Where Egyptians removed organs and packed bodies with natron, these monks transformed themselves from within. Where Chinchoro artisans reshaped the dead, these men sculpted their own flesh through sheer will. Even the Vikings' fiery send-offs, dramatic as they were, lasted mere hours. This ritual spanned decades, a lifetime of discipline distilled into one unthinkable act. Today, a handful of these mummies still sit in temples, their skin like darkened parchment, their faces eerily serene. Visitors leave offerings at their feet, but the monks' greatest legacy might be the questions they force us to ask. How far would you go for what you believe? Is devotion measured in years, in pain, in the silence of a sealed tomb? And when the bell finally stops ringing, what remains of the body, the soul, or the story? The next ritual carries us from solitary asceticism to communal spectacle, where death wasn't a private meditation but a public performance. In the highlands of Madagascar, families dance with their ancestors, lifting their wrapped remains from crypts and twirling them to joyful music. Here, mortality isn't an end, it's a reason to celebrate. In the bustling streets of Accra, Ghana, death wears bright colors and moves to an infectious beat. Here, funerals aren't hushed affairs, they're full-blown spectacles, where grief takes a backseat to celebration. Picture this. A procession winds through the neighborhood, led by pallbearers in sharp suits, swaying and spinning with a casket shaped like a giant Coca-Cola bottle or a soaring eagle. The crowd claps along, some recording on their phones, others joining the dance. This is the Ghanaian fantasy coffin tradition, where the departed are sent off in style, their final ride as unique as the life they lived. The coffins themselves are works of art, hand-carved by master craftsmen into symbols that tell a story. A fisherman might be laid to rest in a wooden tuna, his lifelong connection to the sea honored in polished mahogany. A farmer could descend into the earth inside a giant cocoa pod, a nod to the crop that fed his family. Even modern passions find expression. A taxi driver's coffin might resemble his beloved car, complete with working headlights. These aren't just containers, they're final statements, a way to say, "This is who I was and how I'll be remembered." But the real showstoppers are the dancing pallbearers, professionals who turn casket carrying into a performance. With synchronized steps and gravity-defying lifts, they transform sorrow into something communal and cathartic. Their routines, part tradition, part viral sensation, have even sparked global trends, with clips of their choreography set to upbeat music racking up millions of views online. At first glance, it might seem jarring, even disrespectful, but dig deeper and you'll find a philosophy as old as Ghana itself. Death isn't an end, but a transition worthy of fanfare. This tradition reflects a broader shift in how many cultures are reimagining mourning. Where Western funerals often emphasize solemnity, Ghana's approach embraces the idea that joy and grief can coexist. The dancing, the music, the extravagant coffins, they're all part of a collective refusal to let death have the last word. Families invest heavily in these send-offs, sometimes spending more than a year's salary, because they're not just burying a person, they're celebrating a legacy. The practice also challenges taboos around discussing mortality. In a society where funerals are lively, public events, death loses some of its sting. Children grow up watching these celebrations, learning early that endings can be beautiful. It's a far cry from cultures that hide death behind hospital curtains or funeral home doors. Here, mortality is out in the open, danced with, even laughed about, not to trivialize loss but to disarm its power. Yet beneath the revelry lies a poignant truth. These rituals are as much for the living as the dead. The dancing pallbearers, the custom coffins, the feasts that follow their acts of defiance against the silence that often surrounds grief. When a community mourns together, openly and colorfully, no one has to bear sorrow alone. And perhaps that's the real magic of Ghana's funeral traditions. They remind us that death, for all its inevitability, doesn't get to dictate how we say goodbye. From the vibrant streets of Accra, we journey to a civilization that took a very different approach to honoring the departed one, where mirrors weren't just for the living, but essential companions for the dead. The ancient Etruscans buried their elite with polished bronze-looking glasses, believing reflection held the key to the afterlife. What secrets did they see in those gleaming surfaces? The answer lies in tombs untouched for millennia. Buried alongside noblewomen in ancient Greek tombs, polished bronze mirrors gleam in the darkness, not as mere vanity objects, but as sacred guides for the journey beyond. These weren't the delicate hand mirrors of modern makeup tables. They were heavy, ornate discs, often inscribed with prayers or scenes from mythology, their surfaces meticulously buffed to reflect the soul's true essence. To the Greeks, a mirror was more than a tool for grooming. It was a portal to self-knowledge, a way to confront one's identity before facing the judges of the underworld. The ritual's roots stretch back to the legend of Persephone, who carried a mirror into Hades, symbolizing the soul's reflection in death's realm. Some graves even show mirrors placed near the deceased's face, as if to capture their final breath or preserve their likeness for eternity. But the most intriguing theory comes from the mystery cults of Dionysus and Orpheus, where initiates believed mirrors could reveal hidden truths. In their rituals, staring into a mirror's surface wasn't about vanity, it was a test of spiritual clarity. Would the deceased see their earthly flaws or a glimpse of divine light? Archaeologists have found these mirrors in the graves of women far more often than men, suggesting a gendered dimension to the practice. Perhaps they symbolized the idealized virtues of womanhood, beauty, wisdom, or the ability to reflect societal values. Or maybe they served a practical purpose. In a world without photographs, a mirror might have been the only way to remember a loved one's face. But the most haunting discovery comes from tombs where mirrors were deliberately cracked or buried face down. Were these acts of protection, ensuring the dead couldn't gaze back into the world of the living? The line between superstition and spirituality blurs here. In some traditions, mirrors were thought to trap fragments of the soul, which is why covering them during mourning persists in cultures today. The Greeks might have feared a similar phenomenon, that without a mirror to guide it, the soul could lose its way in the labyrinth of the afterlife. Or perhaps the reflective surface was a metaphor for memory itself, a way to keep the departed present long after their bodies had faded. What's undeniable is the universality of the mirror's symbolism. From the bronze discs of Greece to the obsidian mirrors of Mesoamerican shamans, humans have always sought answers in reflections. These buried mirrors challenge our assumptions about ancient vanity. They weren't frivolous accessories, but sacred compasses, meant to navigate the greatest unknown of all. Now we turn to a culture that took the opposite approach. Rather than guiding the dead, they went to extraordinary lengths to keep them from returning. In medieval Europe, fear of the undead led to burial practices so extreme they'd make even the boldest vampire hunter shudder. Skeletons were found pinned with rocks, decapitated with heads placed between their knees, or bound tightly in shrouds knotted like straitjackets. These weren't random acts of cruelty, but calculated precautions against the terrifying belief that some corpses refused to stay dead. In the quiet churchyards of medieval Europe, beneath the shadow of crumbling stone crosses, some graves were dug with more than grief in mind. They were built to imprison. Skeletons discovered with iron sickles across their throats, heavy stones wedged between their jaws, or even scythe blades pressed against their abdomens tell a chilling story. These weren't ordinary burials, they were vampire traps designed to stop the dead from crawling back into the world of the living. The fear of revenants' corpses that returned to torment the living wasn't just folklore. It was a genuine terror rooted in the upheavals of the time. Plagues like the Black Death wiped out entire villages, leaving mass graves in their wake. When these pits were later reopened, natural decay processes like bloating or the shifting of clothing could make it seem as if bodies had moved after burial. Combine that with reports of spectral figures or unexplained illnesses, and it's easy to see how panic took hold. To medieval communities, these weren't coincidences. They were proof that the dead weren't staying dead. Archaeologists have unearthed countless examples of these defensive burials. In Poland, a skeleton was found with a stone placed directly over its throat, ensuring it could never rise to drink blood. In Ireland, a man's legs were broken and folded backward, a brutal precaution against him walking again. Some graves contained corpses buried face down, a symbolic act meant to confuse the soul's journey and prevent its return. The most extreme measures involved decapitation, with the head placed at the feet or between the knees, severing the connection between body and spirit. But what transformed an ordinary corpse into a vampire in the eyes of medieval Europeans? Suspicion often fell on those who lived on society's margins, outsiders, unbaptized infants, or individuals with physical deformities. Even dying under unusual circumstances like suicide or an accident could mark someone as a potential threat. The rituals didn't stop at burial either. In some regions, suspected vampires were exhumed years after death, their hearts pierced with wooden stakes or their remains burned to ashes. The irony is that these monsters were often the very people their communities failed to protect in life. The marginalized, the sick, the different. In death, they became scapegoats for every unexplained tragedy, from crop failures to disease outbreaks. The vampire burials reveal less about the supernatural and more about human nature, our tendency to fear what we don't understand, and our desperate need to control the uncontrollable. Now we turn from the feared undead to a creature of myth that haunted an entirely different culture, one with scales instead of fangs, and a hunger not for blood, but for chaos itself. The ancient Mesopotamians dreaded the Mushasu, a serpentine dragon believed to rise from the underworld, and their rituals to ward it off were as elaborate as they were eerie. Rising from the rugged landscapes of Sardinia like silent sentinels, the tombs of the giants stand as one of the Mediterranean's most haunting mysteries. These massive stone structures, some stretching nearly 100 feet long, were built over 3,000 years ago by the Nuragic civilization, a people known for their towering stone towers, but whose burial practices remain shrouded in enigma. The name itself sparks intrigue. Tombs of the Giants wasn't coined by archaeologists, but by local farmers who uncovered bones so large they seemed to belong to mythical beings. Skeletons measuring over 7 feet tall have been found in these collective graves, fueling legends of an ancient race of giants who once walked the island. But science offers a more grounded explanation. The extraordinary height of these remains likely stems from a combination of genetic traits and environmental factors unique to Sardinia's early inhabitants. Some researchers point to acromegaly, a condition causing excessive growth, while others suggest nutritional advantages or even selective burial practices. Perhaps only the most revered individuals, who may have been unusually tall, were laid to rest in these monumental tombs. What's undeniable is the care taken in their construction. The tombs feature a central stele, a carved stone slab resembling a doorway, flanked by crescent-shaped wings of stacked basalt. This design wasn't random. The entrance often aligns with the rising sun during equinoxes, suggesting ceremonies tied to cycles of rebirth. Step inside one of these tombs, and you'll find no gold or treasure, just the quiet presence of bones arranged in careful patterns. Unlike the solitary burials common elsewhere, these chambers held dozens of individuals, their remains mingled over generations. This collective approach speaks volumes about Nuragic society. Death wasn't a private affair, but a communal bond linking families across centuries. The tombs themselves became landmarks, gathering places where the living could honor ancestors whose physical presence literally loomed large in memory. Yet the true genius of these structures lies in their acoustics. Recent studies reveal that the curved walls and enclosed spaces create eerie sound amplification. A whisper at one end can be heard clearly at the other. Imagine mourners chanting or drumming, their voices transformed by the stones into something unearthly, blurring the line between the living and the dead. It's a far cry from silent modern cemeteries. Here, death had a voice reverberating through time. From these towering Sardinian tombs, we turn to a ritual where intimacy replaces grandeur. In the quiet villages of the Philippines, the Tiboli people practice a tradition as delicate as it is profound, burying their loved ones beneath the very floors of their homes. No stone monuments, no communal chambers, just the gentle presence of the departed, keeping watch over daily life. Beneath the sweltering Cambodian sun, a haunting forest of glass towers rises from the earth, each one filled not with treasures, but with thousands of human skulls staring silently through the plexiglass. This is the Choang Ek Genocidal Center, where the Khmer Rouge executed nearly 20,000 men, women, and children between 1975 and 1979. The skulls are arranged by age and gender, some bearing cracks from blunt force trauma, others marked by bullet holes. Unlike ancient rituals designed to honor the dead, this modern memorial serves a different purpose: to ensure that atrocity is never forgotten and never repeated. The towers are more than just displays of remains, they're sacred geometry of grief. Buddhist monks regularly chant prayers here, threading ribbons around the structures as offerings to souls denied proper burial. Visitors leave incense sticks in the bullet-pocked killing tree, where soldiers smashed infants against the bark. The contrast between these acts of reverence and the brutality they commemorate is jarring. Where most cultures ritualize death to bring comfort, this site weaponizes memory itself, forcing confrontation with humanity's darkest capacities. How does a society heal from such trauma? The answer lies in the careful balance Cambodia has struck between remembrance and renewal. The skull towers aren't hidden away, they're central to school field trips and international pilgrimages. Survivors work as guides, their personal stories transforming statistics into flesh and blood history. This open wound of a memorial rejects the idea that time heals all wounds. Instead, it insists that some scars must remain visible to serve as warnings. Yet, even amidst such horror, glimmers of ancient tradition persist. Many Cambodians still practice Pi Chum Ben, the annual festival where offerings are made to wandering spirits believed to emerge from hell during the harvest season. Families bring rice balls to temples, tossing them into the air for ancestors who died without proper rites, a poignant parallel to the modern rituals at Choang Ek. Both traditions acknowledge the same truth, that the dead demand recognition, whether they perished centuries ago or within living memory. From this landscape of collective mourning, we journey to a ritual so extreme it defies modern comprehension. In the royal courts of ancient Mesopotamia, kings weren't just buried with their treasures, they were accompanied into the afterlife by their entire households. The royal tombs of reveal mass graves where soldiers, musicians, and handmaidens drank poison to follow their ruler beyond death's threshold. What could compel dozens to willingly take their own lives? The answer lies in a belief system where loyalty didn't end at the grave, it transcended it. Deep beneath the golden sands of where the Tigris and Euphrates once whispered secrets to the Sumerians, archaeologists uncovered a scene that froze time itself. In the royal tombs, row upon row of skeletons lay in perfect formation, soldiers in full armor with spears at their sides, harpists with fingers still curled around invisible strings, handmaidens adorned in gold headdresses, their delicate jewelry untouched by looters. These weren't victims of some catastrophe. They'd walked willingly into the tomb, taken their places, and drunk poison to accompany their king into eternity. The retainer sacrifices of are among history's most chilling acts of devotion, a ritual where loyalty didn't end at death, but transformed into something far more eternal. The scale of these sacrifices staggers modern imagination. In the tomb of Queen Puabi, excavators found 73 attendants, each carefully arranged according to rank and role. Guards stood at attention near the chamber doors, charioteers lay beside their vehicles, even oxen were harnessed to carts, ready to roll into the afterlife. But what's truly unsettling is the absence of struggle. Forensic evidence shows no signs of violence or restraint. These people didn't just die for their ruler, they chose to. To understand why, we must step into the Mesopotamian worldview. Kings weren't just political leaders, they were bridges between gods and mortals. Serving them in life guaranteed honor, but serving them in death promised divine favor. The afterlife wasn't some vague paradise, it was a mirrored version of earthly existence, where kings would still need armies, entertainers, and cupbearers. For retainers, this wasn't just duty, it was promotion. By crossing that threshold together, they secured their place in a cosmic hierarchy that transcended mortality. Yet beneath the surface lies a darker truth. While some may have volunteered, others likely faced immense social pressure. In a society where disobedience could damn one's entire lineage, saying no might not have been an option. The elaborate preparations, fine clothing, ceremonial poses suggest a ritualized performance, one where descent had no stage. The contrast with modern burial customs couldn't be sharper. Today, we memorialize individuals. The retainer sacrifices erase them into service. Their names are lost, their identities swallowed by the king's glory. Only their bones remain, silent witnesses to a time when loyalty was measured not in years but in eternity. From these mass graves, we turn to a ritual where offerings took a far more symbolic form. In the jungles of Mesoamerica, the Maya didn't bury servants with their rulers, they sent their gods gifts through the sacred play of life and death, the ball game. In the emerald jungles of the Yucatan Peninsula, where the earth suddenly opens into deep, water-filled sinkholes, the Maya performed rituals that still send shivers down the spine. These cenotes, natural limestone wells, were considered sacred portals to the underworld, and their dark waters became the final resting place for countless offerings to Chok, the capricious rain god. Among the treasures tossed into these depths, jade beads, golden ornaments, and intricately painted pottery, lie the bones of children, their small skeletons preserved in the cool, mineral-rich waters for over 1,000 years. What drove a civilization known for its astronomical precision and artistic brilliance to such extremes? The answer lies in the Maya's precarious relationship with survival itself. In a land where droughts could wither crops in weeks, Chok wasn't just a deity, he was the difference between feasting and famine. Spanish chroniclers recorded witnesses describing ceremonies where victims, often adorned in turquoise and quetzal feathers, were thrown into the cenotes as messengers to the gods. But modern archaeology reveals an even darker nuance. Some skeletons show signs of prolonged malnutrition or physical trauma before death, suggesting these children weren't just chosen at random. They may have been suffering or orphaned, given up in hopes of securing rain for the many. The act itself was steeped in symbolism. Unlike the quick slash of an altar knife, drowning was a slow, transformative death, emerging with the very element the ritual sought to summon. The cenotes weren't just graves, they were wombs of rebirth where the sacrificed became intermediaries between worlds. Divers exploring these wells today still find artifacts arranged with eerie care. A cluster of jade figurines placed just so, a skull positioned to face a particular fissure in the rock. Every detail was part of a calculated plea to forces beyond human control. Yet the most haunting discovery isn't the violence, it's the evidence of reverence. Some victims were buried with delicate charms or wrapped in precious textiles, treated not as discarded offerings but as honored emissaries. In the Maya's worldview, their deaths weren't an end, but a promotion. A child from a poor village might become a divine attendant in Xibalba, the watery underworld. This perspective doesn't excuse the act, but it complicates our modern judgment. To the Maya, sending a child to the gods was as logical as planting seeds in dry earth and praying for rain. Both were investments in a future only the gods could guarantee. From these depths, we ascend to a ritual where offerings took a far gentler form. In the alpine meadows of Mongolia, nomadic tribes practiced sky burials with a twist. Rather than exposing bodies to vultures, they laid them atop woven carpets adorned with symbols of the sun and moon. Here, death wasn't a demand to the gods, but a quiet return to the cycles of nature. High in the lush forests of Madagascar, where twisting roots weave through the earth like living veins, the dead rest not beneath the soil, but cradled in the branches above. The Malagasy tree burial tradition is as poetic as it is practical. Families wrap their loved ones in intricately woven shrouds, then secure them high in the boughs of sacred fig or baobab trees, where the wind whispers through the leaves and the cycle of life continues in full view. Over time, the forest reclaims what it once gave. The body slowly decomposes, nourishing the very tree that holds it, while the soul is believed to ascend toward the ancestors. This ritual speaks volumes about the Malagasy worldview. Unlike cultures that seal their dead away in stone or metal, the people here see death as part of an unbroken conversation with nature. The trees aren't just containers, they're living memorials, growing taller and stronger with each generation they cradle. Some families even plant a new sapling when someone dies, ensuring their physical form contributes to the forest's future. It's a stark contrast to Western cemeteries, where manicured lawns and marble markers separate the dead from the living ecosystem. In Madagascar, the boundary between the two is deliberately blurred. But the practice isn't just symbolic, it's born of necessity. In regions where the water table is high or the soil too rocky for digging, tree burials offer a sustainable solution. The wrappings, often made of resilient silk or bark cloth, protect the body long enough for mourning rituals to conclude before nature takes its course. And there's a profound intimacy to it. Families can visit these trees, touch them, even speak to them, knowing their loved ones are quite literally part of the landscape they cherished in life. From these aerial tombs, we turn to a civilization that took permanence to the opposite extreme. The Nabatians, those ingenious builders of Petra, didn't just bury their dead, they carved entire cities of the deceased into rose-red cliffs, ensuring their presence would endure for millennia. Where the Malagasy embraced transience, the Nabatians sought eternity in stone. Rising from Yemen's rugged highlands like ancient sentinels, the stone towers of the Himyarites stand silent against the desert winds. These aren't fortresses or palaces, they're houses for the dead, their narrow windows staring emptily across the valleys. Built by a civilization that thrived over 2,000 years ago, these towering structures were designed to keep the deceased as far from the living as possible, both physically and spiritually. Unlike cultures that buried their dead beneath their feet or carried them to mountaintops, the Himyarites took vertical separation to extraordinary heights, stacking their dead in multi-story stone tombs that scraped the sky. The engineering alone is staggering. Some towers reach over 60 feet, their walls constructed without mortar, each stone precisely cut to fit snugly against its neighbors. Inside, narrow ledges held the bodies, arranged in a seated position as if watching over the land below. But why go to such lengths? The answer lies in the Himyarites' unique relationship with death. To them, corpses weren't just remains, they were potential conduits for malevolent spirits. By elevating the dead, they created a literal and symbolic barrier between the living world and the unseen forces that might hitch a ride on the departed. The higher the tomb, the harder it would be for restless souls to descend and cause mischief. Yet these towers weren't just practical, they were statements of power. The most elaborate ones belonged to elites, their facades adorned with intricate carvings of ibexes and geometric patterns, a visual language proclaiming the family's status even in death. Ordinary citizens, by contrast, were often interred in simpler, shared towers. This hierarchy mirrors the Himyarites' rigid social structure, where one's position in life dictated their resting place in death. What's truly fascinating is how these structures functioned as communal landmarks. Unlike hidden catacombs or secluded cemeteries, the towers clustered near settlements, their silhouettes defining the horizon. Families would visit to leave offerings or recite prayers, maintaining a connection with ancestors while respecting the boundary between worlds. The towers became part of daily life, a constant reminder of mortality, but also of continuity. From these silent stone giants, we turn to a culture that refused to let death be silent at all. In the Andean highlands, the Callawaya people send off their dead with flutes, drums, and joyful processions, transforming mourning into a celebration that echoes through the mountains. Where the Himyarites built barriers, the Callawaya bridged the gap between life and death with music's universal language. The streets of New Orleans come alive with a sound unlike any other, a slow, mournful dirge giving way to a burst of trumpets and trombones, the rhythm shifting from a funeral march to a dance beat mid-step. This is the jazz funeral, where sorrow and celebration collide in a tradition as vibrant as the city itself. The procession begins in solemnity. Mourners in black follow the hearse, their voices rising in hymns like "Just a Closer Walk with Thee," the melody heavy with grief. But the moment the body is laid to rest, the mood transforms. The band strikes up when the saints go marching in. Handkerchiefs wave, and the second line, a parade of neighbors and strangers, sways and twirls behind the musicians. Their steps a defiant declaration that even death can't stifle joy. This ritual is a cultural tapestry woven from West African circle dances, French military brass bands, and Caribbean carnival energy. Enslaved people, barred from traditional European funerals, created their own ceremonies, infusing them with rhythms that refused to be silenced. The jazz funeral became more than a send-off. It was an act of resilience, a way to reclaim dignity in the face of loss. The music's evolution mirrors the journey of grief itself, starting in sorrow, then building toward catharsis. As the tempo quickens, mourners shed tears and raise umbrellas adorned with feathers, their bodies moving as if shaking off the weight of sorrow. What's remarkable is how the ritual acknowledges grief's duality. The slow hymns honor the pain of separation, while the jubilant jazz affirms that life, like the music, must go on. Musicians call this shift cutting loose the body, a moment when the deceased is released to the ancestors and the living are freed to dance. Even the instruments carry symbolism. The trumpet's clarity represents the voice of the departed, while the tuba's deep notes ground the procession in the earth's rhythms. The contrast with conventional funerals couldn't be starker. Where many cultures sequester death in quiet chapels or graveside whispers, New Orleans brings it into the streets, inviting the whole community to participate. Strangers join the second line, swept up in the music's tide, proving that grief, when shared, becomes lighter. The jazz funeral doesn't just mourn a life, it amplifies it, one brassy note at a time. From this symphony of sorrow and joy, we journey to a place where silence preserves the dead. In the Andes, the Inca crafted mummies that defied time, their frozen bodies curled in eternal slumber atop the world's highest peaks. While New Orleans sent souls off with sound, the Inca offered them the quiet majesty of mountains. At over 22,000 feet above sea level, where the air is too thin to breathe and the cold bites like a blade, a young girl sat cross-legged on a stone platform, her head slightly bowed as if in prayer. The Ice Maiden of the Andes, known to scientists as Juanita, was just 12 years old when she was led up the slopes of Mount Ampoto, given a ceremonial drink of chicha, and struck with a single, precise blow to the head. Then the Inca priests wrapped her in fine textiles, surrounded her with gold and silver figurines, and left her to the mountain's eternal embrace. For 500 years, the ice kept her secrets, preserving her delicate features, her woolen dress, even the remnants of her last meal, until a volcanic eruption melted the glacier, revealing her to the modern world. Juanita's story is more than a tragic tale. It's a window into the Incas' sacred relationship with the mountains they called apus, or living gods. Unlike cultures that feared death, the Inca saw it as a bridge between realms, and children like Juanita were considered perfect messengers, pure, untainted by adulthood, and thus worthy to stand before the divine. Forensic tests revealed she was well-fed and healthy, her nails perfectly trimmed before her death, proof she was chosen and cherished. The figurines buried with her weren't just offerings, they were companions for her journey, llamas to carry her burdens, tiny humans to serve her in the afterlife. But why a mountain peak? The Inca believed the highest summits were portals to the heavens, places where the physical and spiritual worlds touched. By placing sacrifices there, they forged a direct line to the gods who controlled rain, harvests, and the fate of their empire. Juanita wasn't a victim, she was a bridge, her death a sacred transaction to ensure her people's survival. The thin air, the brutal cold, even the isolation, all were part of the ritual's power. Her preservation wasn't an accident, it was a sign the mountain had accepted the gift. The contrast with modern attitudes toward childhood is jarring. Today, we shield children from even the mention of death, yet the Inca entrusted theirs with the most profound spiritual responsibility. Juanita's frozen face, so eerily peaceful, challenges our assumptions about sacrifice. Was her fate cruel, or was it the highest honor her culture could bestow? The answer lies somewhere between our world and hers, in the understanding that values shift like mountain shadows across centuries. From these icy heights, we descend to a warmer but no less mysterious practice. On the sun-drenched islands of the Philippines, the ancient Kalinga people buried their dead not in the ground, but in large earthen jars, some perched on cliffs, others tucked into caves. These weren't mere containers, they were wombs of rebirth, shaped like the vessels used to store rice and wine, symbolizing life's cyclical nature. The bodies were carefully folded into the fetal position, as if returning to the beginning, surrounded by beads, tools, and sometimes even the skulls of previous generations. What makes these jar burials so fascinating is their intimacy. Unlike grand tombs or towering mausoleums, each jar held just one or two individuals, often family members reunited in death. The Kalinga saw the jars as protective shells, shielding the dead from the elements and malevolent spirits. Some were sealed with lids carved with faces, giving the deceased a presence among the living. Others were painted with ochre, a color linked to vitality, as if to whisper that death wasn't an end but a transformation. Archaeologists have found these jars in clusters, suggesting burial sites were communal gathering places where the living could commune with ancestors. Imagine a family arriving at a cave, placing offerings beside a grandmother's jar, or whispering prayers to a child's vessel. The practice blurred the line between past and present, making memory tangible. The Kalinga's jars and the Inca's ice-bound sacrifices represent two sides of the same coin, one embracing the cold solitude of the peaks, the other the warm closeness of shared vessels. Yet both rituals share a common thread, the belief that death isn't a disappearance but a change of address. Whether in a mountain's frozen grip or a jar's earthen embrace, the dead were never truly gone, just waiting in their own way to be remembered. On the sun-drenched islands of the Philippines, ancient potters crafted vessels not just for rice or water, but for the dead themselves. These weren't ordinary jars. Some stood taller than a person, their bellies swollen, their surfaces etched with swirling patterns or molded into the shapes of animals, frogs with wide mouths, birds with outstretched wings, even snakes coiled around the rim. The Kalinga people, along with other indigenous groups, tucked their loved ones inside these earthen wombs, folding their limbs carefully into the fetal position before sealing them away in caves or along cliffsides. But this wasn't merely about storage, it was about containment. Archaeologists have uncovered jar burial sites where dozens of these vessels cluster together, some stacked like silent sentinels guarding the entrance to a cave. Inside, skeletons rest curled on beds of beads, pottery shards, or even the bones of earlier burials, a generational nesting doll of memory. The jars themselves tell stories. Traces of soot suggest they were once part of household fires before being repurposed for the dead, blurring the line between domestic life and the afterlife. Some were sealed with stone lids carved with faces, their hollow eyes watching over the living, while others were deliberately cracked, perhaps to release the spirit or to prevent it from returning too often. What's most striking is the duality of these burials. On one hand, the jars symbolize protection, a sturdy barrier against scavengers or malevolent spirits. On the other, they reflect a deep-seated unease. Oral traditions hint that the Kalinga feared the dead might speak, their whispers carrying curses or demands from beyond. By confining them to jars, especially those shaped like animals associated with the spirit world, they effectively muted them. A frog-shaped vessel, for example, might have been chosen to symbolize transformation, its wide mouth incapable of forming human words. Yet there's tenderness here too. Many jars were placed in locations the deceased cherished, overlooking a favorite fishing spot or nestled in a grove of fruit trees. Families visited regularly, leaving offerings of food or trinkets, treating the jars less like tombs and more like portals for conversation. In this way, the ritual balanced fear with love, keeping the dead close enough to honor but contained enough to feel safe. From these silent clay guardians, we journey to a culture that took the opposite approach, not restraining the dead, but weaponizing their voices. In medieval Europe, the crisis apparition phenomenon led to graves being fitted with bells, tied to strings that ran into the coffin. The fear wasn't that the dead would speak, but that they might ring for help because sometimes they weren't as dead as they seemed. The mummy's mouth yawns wide, its leathery lips pulled back in what seems like an eternal scream, a sight so unsettling it sparked legends of curses echoing from the grave. These so-called screaming mummies of Egypt have fueled nightmares for centuries, with some claiming they were pharaohs frozen in agony, punished by the gods. But science tells a quieter, though no less fascinating, story. When muscles relax after death, the jaw often falls open, especially if the head tilts backward during decomposition. Without the careful linen wrappings and resin treatments used on royal mummies, ordinary Egyptians' remains were left vulnerable to these natural processes. Yet the myth persists, proving how easily a quirk of biology can twist into supernatural lore when faced with the unknown. What's revealing is how these stories reflect our own fears rather than ancient realities. The Victorians, who first popularized the screaming mummy trope, lived in an era obsessed with Gothic horror and repressed emotion. A gaping mouth wasn't just a medical anomaly, it became a symbol of unrest, a voice from the past demanding to be heard. Even today, museums display these mummies with dramatic lighting, amplifying their eerie presence. The truth may be mundane, but the power of the myth endures, reminding us that history is often shaped by the stories we choose to tell about it. From these silent screams, we turn to a culture that sent its dead sailing into eternity, not with curses, but with reverence. The ancient Nubians, neighbors to Egypt along the Nile's southern stretches, buried their elite in full-sized boats, even in the driest desert sands. These vessels weren't mere replicas, they were functional with oars and rigging, as if ready to navigate celestial rivers. One tomb at the site of Qustul contained a royal woman laid to rest in a 15-foot wooden boat, surrounded by sacrificed attendants and treasures fit for a voyage beyond the horizon. Why boats in a land where the nearest water might be miles away? The Nubians saw death as a journey, not just metaphorically, but literally. Their myths spoke of a watery underworld where the sun god sailed through darkness each night, and the deceased needed their own ships to join him. The desert itself was once a seabed, its fossilized shells and striated cliffs whispering of ancient oceans. By burying their dead in boats, the Nubians bridged two worlds, the arid earth that sustained them in life, and the remembered waters that would carry them beyond it. The contrast with Egypt's tomb-centric afterlife is striking. Where pharaohs built pyramids as stairways to the stars, Nubian kings opted for mobility, their grave sites resembling docks more than monuments. Some boats were even positioned to face downstream, aligning with the Nile's northward flow, a final gesture toward the cosmic currents they believed would guide their souls. Today, these buried fleets endure as testaments to a culture that saw death not as an end, but as the boldest voyage of all. Among the misty fjords and towering cedar forests of the Pacific Northwest, the Tlingit people honored their dead with a farewell as fluid as the waters that shaped their lives. When a great chief passed, they didn't lower his body into the earth, they placed him inside a hand-carved canoe, propped upright against a tree or suspended between posts as if paused mid-journey. These weren't mere coffins, they were vessels for the soul, crafted with the same precision as the war canoes that once sliced through icy channels. The prow might be adorned with the clan's crest, a watchful raven or thunderbird, while the stern held practical gifts, weapons for protection, blankets for warmth, even carved feast dishes filled with dried salmon and berries. To the Tlingit, death wasn't an end, but a voyage to the spirit world, and no traveler should embark unprepared. The symbolism ran deeper than the hull. Canoes were the lifeblood of Tlingit culture, tools for trade, warfare, and ceremony. By transforming one into a tomb, they blurred the line between the practical and the sacred. Some graves featured canoes split lengthwise, their halves cradling the body like a shell protecting its core. Others were left whole, with the chief seated inside, his face painted ceremonially as if awaiting the tide. The most striking examples came from high-ranking shamans, whose canoes bristled with carved spirit figures, guardians to navigate the unseen currents ahead. But these graves weren't solitary. They clustered in ghost villages, islands of the dead accessible only by water, where the lapping waves kept time with the ancestors. Visitors arriving by kayak would see dozens of canoes weathering under the sky, some draped with woven cedar bark mats to shield their occupants from rain. The effect was hauntingly beautiful, a fleet forever at anchor, waiting for winds that would never come. What's often overlooked is the ritual's ecological harmony. Unlike stone mausoleums or metal caskets, these wooden graves decayed naturally, returning to the forest that birthed them. The Tlingit saw this disintegration not as loss, but as completion, the body rejoining the earth while the spirit sailed on. Even the placement of graves reflected this balance. Chiefs were buried near fishing grounds or trade routes, their presence believed to bless the living who followed in their wake. From these quiet waterways, we turn to a culture where death wasn't met with silence, but with a roar of laughter and the clatter of feast bowls. In the highlands of Sulawesi, the Toraja people celebrate funerals with sprawling banquets that last days, where the deceased is toasted, teased, and treated as an honored guest. The contrast couldn't be starker. Where the Tlingit emphasized solemn transition, the Toraja insist death is just another reason to gather. In the highlands of Madagascar, where the air hums with the scent of vanilla and cloves, death is not a one-time farewell, it's a reunion waiting to happen. Every 5 to 7 years, families gather at ancestral tombs, their laughter mixing with the rhythmic beat of drums as they pry open stone crypts. Inside lie their loved ones, wrapped in frayed silk shrouds, their bones softened by time. This is Famadihana, the turning of the bones, where the dead are lifted into the sunlight, cradled like newborns, and danced with under the open sky. To outsiders, it might seem macabre, a celebration with corpses, but for the Malagasy, it's the purest expression of love across generations. The ritual begins with meticulous care. Elders whisper apologies as they unwind the old burial cloths, their hands gentle as they cleanse the remains with fragrant alcohol. New shrouds, brightly colored lambas woven with intricate patterns, are draped around the bones, each fold a whispered promise, you are not forgotten. Then comes the moment that defies Western sensibilities. The wrapped bundles are hoisted onto shoulders, and the music swells. Relatives sway and spin, their steps light as they carry their ancestors through the crowd, pausing to press cheeks against the cloth-wrapped skulls as if sharing secrets. Children giggle as they touch great-grandparents they've only known through stories, while elders weep with a joy too deep for words. Why dance with the dead? The answer lies in Madagascar's spiritual heartbeat. Here, ancestors aren't gone, they're active guardians, their blessings as vital as rain. By exhuming them, families renew the bond between worlds, ensuring their guidance remains strong. The dancing, its practical magic, motion stirs the ancestors' spirits, waking them to hear prayers about harvests, marriages, or disputes needing wisdom. The fresh shrouds are more than ceremonial, they're armor against the afterlife's chill, a tactile reminder that love doesn't end with decay. The contrast with modern mourning rituals is profound. Where many cultures visit graves to leave flowers or stand in silence, the Malagasy bring their dead into the heart of the party. A Famadihana might feature roast zebu, locally brewed rum, and laughter so loud it shakes the hills. Grief isn't absent, it's woven into the celebration, a recognition that sorrow and joy are threads of the same cloth. Even the timing reflects this balance. The ceremonies are held in winter, when the land is dormant, as if to remind the living that dormancy isn't death, and that what lies beneath the surface is always preparing to rise again. From these vibrant reunions, we turn to a civilization that reserved its most elaborate tombs not for kings or warriors, but for loyal companions. In ancient Ashkelon, a bustling port city in what's now Israel, archaeologists uncovered a sprawling graveyard with over 1,000 carefully arranged skeletons, each one a dog. The Ashkelon Dog Cemetery, dating back to the 5th century BCE, reveals a culture that honored its four-legged friends with astonishing tenderness. The graves tell silent stories. Some dogs were buried with collars of delicate bronze, others curled as if sleeping, their paws tucked beneath their muzzles. Unlike ritual sacrifices found elsewhere, these show no signs of trauma, only age, illness, or the gentle wear of time. The sheer scale of the cemetery suggests this was no casual practice. These were intentional burials, often grouped by size or breed, with smaller pups nestled beside larger adults like families resting together. What compelled a bustling trade hub to dedicate precious land to dogs? The answer may lie in Ashkelon's patron deity, the goddess Tanit, often depicted with a canine companion. Dogs were seen as mediators between worlds, their keen senses bridging the visible and invisible. But the care in these burials hints at something deeper affection. The way a puppy's bones were arranged to cradle a chew toy, or an old hound's grave lined with seashells, speaks of a bond that transcends utility. These weren't just sacred symbols, they were beloved individuals, their lives honored as richly as any humans. A parallel to Famadihana is striking. Both rituals reject the idea that death severs connection. Where the Malagasy dance with their ancestors, the Ashkelonites built monuments to their dogs, ensuring their paws left prints on history. One culture celebrated cyclical renewal, the other memorialized unconditional loyalty. Together, they whisper the same truth. How we honor the departed reveals how deeply we've loved and how fiercely we hope to be remembered in turn. Beneath the cobblestone streets of ancient Rome, where the grand tombs of senators and emperors stretched toward the sky, smaller, quieter graves held treasures of a different kind, beloved pets laid to rest with tenderness that rivals our own. Along the Appian Way, archaeologists have uncovered marble slabs etched with heartbreaking sincerity. To Helena, foster child, soul without comparison, reads one epitaph for a dog. Another memorializes a bird with, "You who are so charming, snatched too soon from life." These weren't just animals to their owners, they were family, mourned with the same depth of feeling we reserve for human loved ones. The Roman approach to pet death reveals a surprising intimacy between species. Wealthy families commissioned ornate sarcophagi for their dogs, often depicting them curled at the feet of their masters, a motif later echoed in medieval knightly tombs. Some graves included toys, collars with tinkling bronze bells, or even gourmet treats like honey cakes, ensuring comfort in the afterlife. But the most poignant finds are the inscriptions themselves, which swing between poetic grief and wry humor. One tablet laments, "I am in tears while carrying you to your last resting place as much as I rejoiced when bringing you home," while another jokes, "You never barked without reason, but now you are silent forever." What's truly fascinating is how these burials blurred spiritual boundaries. Romans believed in the manes, spirits of the dead who required remembrance to thrive in the underworld. By inscribing pets' names and offering them graveside banquets, owners extended this sacred duty beyond humans. A dog buried beneath a villa's threshold wasn't just a cherished companion, it became a guardian spirit, its loyalty transcending death. This challenges the assumption that ancient cultures saw animals merely as tools or symbols. For many Romans, the bond was personal, emotional, and worthy of ceremony. Yet this tenderness existed alongside a starkly different practice. In the same city that mourned lapdogs with verses, some cultures feared the dead so intensely they buried them with precautions against supernatural hunger. The Greeks, for example, placed coins over corpses' eyes to pay Charon the ferryman, but also tucked meal stones in graves' flat rocks believed to absorb the deceased's eternal appetite. A single society could swing between love and dread, proving that death rituals are never monolithic, but mirrors of our deepest contradictions. The contrast couldn't be sharper, where Roman pet epitaphs whisper of reunion, "We will meet again in Elysium." Other graves scream of restraint, with bodies pinned under stones or mouths stuffed with garlic. Both responses, though opposite, spring from the same source, the unbearable weight of absence and the need to shape what comes after. Whether through tender words or desperate barriers, every culture grapples with the silence left behind, dressing it in stories that let us sleep at night. From these intimate Roman farewells, we turn to a ritual where food wasn't just an offering, but a lifeline, the Chinese practice of ghost feasts, where families laid out elaborate banquets to nourish ancestors who might otherwise starve in the afterlife. The dead, it seems, were always hungry. In the quiet stillness of a Chinese graveyard, a porcelain bowl sits atop a weathered tombstone, filled with steaming rice and slices of roasted pork, a meal prepared with the same care as one served to living relatives. This was no casual gesture, it was a lifeline to the afterlife. The ancient Chinese believed the departed continued to experience hunger, their spiritual forms sustained by the aromas and essence of food left by descendants. Families would lay out elaborate feasts during festivals like Qingming, the tomb sweeping day, setting places with chopsticks and cups of wine as if hosting an invisible banquet. The offerings ranged from simple millet cakes to whole roasted pigs, depending on the family's means, but the message was universal: you are remembered and you will not want. The ritual wasn't merely symbolic, it was a matter of cosmic responsibility. Ancestors who went unfed were thought to become hungry ghosts, restless spirits doomed to wander the earth in torment. These pitiful figures, often depicted in art with distended bellies and needle-thin throats, served as cautionary tales. A single missed offering could unravel generations of spiritual care, leaving souls stranded between worlds. Some families took precautions, burning joss paper printed with images of money, clothes, and even smartphones' modern twists on an ancient practice to ensure their loved ones lacked nothing in the afterlife. But what happened when lineages died out or graves were forgotten? Communities stepped in. Public altars were erected for the orphan dead, where strangers could leave offerings to placate spirits with no living descendants. This collective duty reveals a profound cultural truth. In China, the boundary between family and society blurred when it came to caring for the departed. Even in death, no one was truly alone. The contrast with the next ritual couldn't be starker. While the Chinese feared their ancestors might starve, the ancient Canary Islanders of North Africa took a more hands-off approach, sealing their dead in volcanic caves with no food at all. The Guanches, as they were known, mummified their elite with techniques rivaling Egypt's, then placed them in hidden caverns high in the cliffs of Tenerife. These weren't graves but time capsules where bodies dried in the arid winds, their hands folded over chests as if in eternal meditation. The Guanches believed the caves' pockmarks from long dormant volcanoes were gateways to the divine. Unlike the Chinese, who actively nourished their dead, the islanders saw preservation as the ultimate act of reverence. A mummy in a sacred cave didn't need offerings. It had become part of the landscape itself, a bridge between earth and sky. Some caves held dozens of bodies, their skin darkened by resins, their mouths stitched shut to keep evil spirits from entering. The silence here was deliberate, no feasts, no chatter, just the whisper of wind through stone. Yet both cultures shared a deeper impulse to keep the dead present, whether through steaming bowls of rice or silent caves that defied decay. These rituals transformed absence into something tangible. The Chinese fed their ancestors to keep them close. The Guanches hid them away to make them eternal. One filled the afterlife with the clatter of dishes, the other with the patience of stone. Both understood that memory alone is fragile, but ritual that endures. Now we descend deeper into the earth, where another civilization turned the underworld into a kingdom. The Nabatians, those master carvers of Petra, didn't just bury their dead, they built them palaces in the cliffs, complete with ornate facades and hidden chambers. If the Guanches hid their mummies like secrets, the Nabatians displayed theirs like royalty, painting the desert with monuments too grand to ignore. Carved into the rose-red cliffs of Petra, the tombs of the Nabatians glow like jewels at sunset, their ornate facades towering over the desert with a grandeur reserved for kings. These weren't simple graves, they were palaces for the dead, their columns and pediments painstakingly chiseled into solid rock, as if the afterlife demanded an address worthy of eternity. The Nabatians, those master traders who turned a barren valley into a crossroads of civilizations, didn't just bury their dead, they immortalized them in stone, transforming cliffs into cities of the departed. Walk through the sick Petra's winding canyon entrance, and the first sight to take your breath away is Al Kosne, the treasury. Its Hellenistic columns and intricate friezes seem to defy gravity, a testament to the Nabatians' engineering genius. But peer closer, those towering doors don't lead to treasure chambers. They open into tombs, their inner chambers cool and silent, their walls unadorned compared to the theatrical exteriors. This contrast reveals the ritual's heart. The facades weren't for the dead, but for the living. They proclaimed status, yes, but also served as stages for ceremonies where mourners gathered to feast, pour libations, and commune with ancestors. The cliffs became a canvas where grief met glory. Each chisel marked a dialogue between mortality and memory. Why carve graves into cliffs? Practicality played a role. Petra's sandstone was soft enough to shape yet durable enough to endure. But the deeper answer lies in the Nabatians' nomadic roots. Before they built Petra, they roamed the desert, where rock formations were natural landmarks. By carving tombs into cliffs, they anchored their dead to the landscape, turning transient lives into permanent landmarks. The tombs also guarded against grave robbers. Their lofty placements made looting a perilous climb. Yet there's something more poetic at work here. In a land where water was scarce and the sun relentless, the cliffs offered shade and shelter, a final kindness to those who'd crossed into the unknown. The most striking detail, many tombs feature channels carved to funnel rainwater into cisterns below. Even in death, the Nabatians harnessed the desert's scarcest resource, as if ensuring their ancestors would never thirst. This blend of artistry and utility captures their worldview. Death wasn't an end, but a transformation as deliberate as the slow shaping of stone. From these sun-baked cliffs, we turn to a ritual where preservation took a sweeter, stickier form. In ancient Georgia, a land lush with vineyards, the dead were buried not in rock but in golden honey, a practice as practical as it was poetic. The Greeks wrote of the Colchians, who submerged their elite in vats of honey, turning corpses into preserves that defied decay. When Alexander the Great died in Babylon, legend claims his body was transported in a coffin filled with honey to Macedonia, his features eerily intact. Honey's antibacterial properties made it nature's perfect embalming fluid, but its symbolism ran deeper. To cultures that revered bees as messengers between worlds, honey was divine, a substance that never spoiled, much like the soul. A body preserved in amber-hued sweetness wasn't just protected, it was sanctified, its physical form as enduring as the legacy it left behind. The contrast with Petra's stone tombs is stark. One relied on the unyielding permanence of rock, the other on the liquid gold of life itself. Yet both rituals shared a conviction that death wasn't disappearance but a change of state, as deliberate as honey crystallizing or sandstone hardening under the sun. The next ritual carries us from these golden vats to a practice far less sweet, the catacombs of Paris, where centuries of bones were arranged not with reverence, but with eerie efficiency, stacked like firewood in the city's echoing underground. In the lush valleys of ancient Georgia, where vineyards sprawled under the Caucasus sun, nobles prepared for eternity, not with bandages or embalming fluids, but with honey. Golden, thick, and impossibly sweet, this humble pantry staple became the key to immortality for the elite. Imagine a warrior king lowered into a vat of honey, his body submerged in the sticky amber liquid until every inch was preserved. Unlike the elaborate 70-day process of Egyptian mummification, which involved removing organs and packing cavities with natron, Georgian honey mummification was startlingly simple. The antibacterial properties of honey created an airtight seal, halting decay while infusing the skin with a golden sheen. Even the Greeks marveled at the results. Historian Strabo wrote of Colchian nobles whose features remained eerily lifelike centuries after death. But why honey? Beyond its practical preservation qualities, it held deep spiritual significance. In Georgian myth, bees were messengers between worlds, their honey a divine gift. To be preserved in it wasn't just practical, it was a sacred transformation, as if the deceased were being cradled by the gods themselves. The contrast with Egyptian mummies is striking. Where pharaohs were desiccated to endure the arid afterlife, Georgian nobles were embalmed in a substance that symbolized abundance and eternity. One method fought decay through dryness, the other through sweetness. The most famous honey mummy wasn't even Georgian. Alexander the Great, according to legend, was transported from Babylon to Macedonia in a honey-filled coffin, his body perfectly intact. Whether true or not, the story reveals how widely the practice was admired. Yet for all its elegance, honey mummification had limits. Unlike the linen-wrapped mummies of Egypt, which could be displayed or moved, honey-preserved bodies were cumbersome, their vats often left in place as permanent tombs. And while Egyptian mummification was a science honed over millennia, Georgian honey burials were rarer, reserved for those who could afford such a lavish use of a precious resource. From these golden tombs, we turn to a civilization gripped by the opposite fear, not preserving the dead but restraining them. Medieval Europeans, haunted by tales of revenants, devised burial rituals so extreme they'd make even the bravest vampire hunter shudder. Graves filled with skeletons pinned under rocks, decapitated with heads placed between their knees, or bound in knotted shrouds, tell a story of terror as much as tradition. The dead, it seems, weren't always content to stay dead. In the sweltering heat of rural Haiti, where sugarcane fields rustle with whispers of the unseen, a whispered legend persists, one that blurs the line between poison and magic. They call it zombie powder, a mysterious concoction said to strip victims of their will, leaving them hollow-eyed and obedient, trapped between life and death. The recipe varies by storyteller: crushed pufferfish toxins, ground millipedes, human bones pulverized under the new moon. But the horror isn't just in the ingredients, it's in the fear that fuels it. This isn't mere folklore. It's a dark mirror reflecting centuries of slavery, oppression, and the desperate belief that even death might not free you from a master's grip. The science behind the myth is as chilling as the tales themselves. Tetrodotoxin, a potent neurotoxin found in pufferfish, can induce a state so cataleptic that victims appear dead, slowed heartbeat, frozen limbs, breath shallow enough to evade detection. Buried hastily in Haiti's thin soil, a zombie might later be dug up by a boka, a voodoo priest who straddles healing and harm. Dosed with antidotes like datura, a hallucinogenic plant, the disoriented victim could wake in a haze, convinced they'd returned from the grave. To outsiders, it's pharmacology masquerading as magic. But in a land where colonial plantations once worked people to literal death, the symbolism cuts deeper. Zombies weren't monsters, they were metaphors for the enslaved, robbed of autonomy even in their own bodies. Cultural anthropologists trace the zombie myth to the trauma of the transatlantic slave trade. Enslaved Africans brought to Haiti believed death would spirit them back to Guinea, their ancestral homeland. But what if even that escape was stolen? The zombie became the ultimate horror, a soul-denied liberation, condemned to toil endlessly. After Haiti's revolution in 1804, the fear mutated. Zombie lore warned against greed or betrayal. Tales spoke of businessmen who sold their relatives' souls for wealth, only to see them shuffling through markets at night. The powder wasn't just a tool, it was a moral lesson, a reminder that some chains outlast the grave. Yet the ritual's power lies in its ambiguity. In voodoo, which blends West African spirituality with Catholicism, the dead aren't gone, their ancestors guiding the living. A zombie, then, is a perversion of that sacred bond, a soul hijacked before it could join its kin. Modern cases, like the infamous Clavius Narcissus, who claimed to have been zombified in 1962, blur fact and fiction. Was he poisoned by a rival, suffering from mental illness, or did he embody a collective nightmare, one where freedom is always fragile? From this shadowy crossroads of poison and fear, we turn to our final ritual, one that doesn't manipulate death but defies it entirely. High in the Himalayas, Buddhist monks achieved the impossible. Bodies that never decay, their skin gilded, their poses serene, as if death was just another meditation. The science is baffling, the spirituality profound, and the mystery lingers like incense in a temple hall. Beneath the sun-baked streets of Malta, where Mediterranean light paints everything in gold, lies a darkness so ancient it predates the pyramids. The Hypogeum of Saflioni isn't just a burial site, it's an entire subterranean city of the dead, carved from solid limestone over 5,000 years ago. Imagine descending into this labyrinth, where every step takes you deeper into a world where ceilings curve like sacred domes, walls whisper with ochre-red spirals, and the air hums with a silence so thick it feels alive. Here, the bones of 7,000 souls were carefully arranged in collective graves, their skulls cradled in niches, their long bones stacked like offerings to some unseen keeper of the underworld. This was no haphazard catacomb. It was a meticulously engineered realm where death wasn't an end but a doorway. What's most astonishing isn't just the scale, 3 levels plunging 40 feet underground, but the precision. The Hypogeum's architects carved chambers that amplify sound in uncanny ways. A whisper uttered in one room resonates through the entire complex, a phenomenon that's led to claims of ghostly murmurs lingering in the damp air. Modern acousticians have studied this oracle chamber, where certain frequencies produce eerie vibrations as if the stone itself sings. Was this intentional? Some researchers believe the Hypogeum's builders used sound as part of burial rites, perhaps to guide spirits or induce trances. The walls, painted with motifs of spirals and honeycombs, symbols found in Neolithic sites worldwide, hint at a shared spiritual language, one where death was a journey orchestrated with both artistry and science. But the Hypogeum's true mystery lies in its dual purpose. While later cultures separated spaces for the living and the dead, this complex blurred the line entirely. Upper chambers show signs of ritual feasting, with animal bones and pottery shards suggesting the living dined alongside their ancestors. Narrow, sleeping chambers may have been used for dream incubation, where seekers curled into fetal positions, hoping to receive visions from the other side. This wasn't a place of fear, it was a threshold where communities maintained relationships with those who'd crossed over. The dead weren't sealed away, they remained active participants in the world above, their presence woven into daily life through ceremony and memory. Yet for all its grandeur, the Hypogeum was nearly lost to time. Rediscovered in 1902 by construction workers, its entrance hidden beneath a suburban home, the site quickly became a magnet for both archaeologists and mystics. Early excavators reported missing artifacts and inexplicable shadows moving through unlit passages. Even today, visitors describe sudden drops in temperature or the sensation of being watched, phenomena science can't fully explain. Whether these experiences stem from suggestion, infrasound, or something more profound, they underscore the Hypogeum's enduring power to unsettle and awe. As our journey through these 30 rituals ends, the Hypogeum offers a final lesson. Humanity's relationship with death has always been as complex as it is universal. From the sky burials of Tibet to the honeyed tombs of Georgia, every culture has wrestled with the same unanswerable questions, shaping grief into practices as diverse as the landscapes that birthed them. Some sought to preserve, others to release. Some fed their ancestors while others feared their return. But beneath it all runs a common thread: the refusal to let death erase a life's meaning. The Hypogeum, with its echoing chambers and silent bones, reminds us that even in darkness we build. We carve our questions into stone, we sing to the unseen, and we leave behind not just bodies but stories. And perhaps that's the most enduring ritual of all. From the soaring cliffs of Sardinia to the silent depths of Maltese catacombs, these 30 rituals paint a breathtaking mosaic of how humanity has danced with death across the ages. Some cultures sent their loved ones skyward on the wings of vultures, while others sealed them in golden honey, preserving tenderly what time sought to erase. The Vikings launched their dead in blazing ships toward Valhalla's halls, and the Malagasy danced with ancestors' bones under the open sky, each ritual a unique language for the unspeakable, a way to cradle the great mystery we all must face. What unites these traditions isn't just their diversity, it's the raw honesty they reveal about life itself. The Roman epitaphs for pets, etched with jokes and tears, show how deeply love can root itself across species. The Canary Islanders' cave burials whisper of a people who saw eternity in volcanic silence, while Ghana's dancing pallbearers turned grief into a rhythm the whole neighborhood could share. Even the darkest practices, the revenant pins, the cenote sacrifices, stem from the same primal need. to protect the living from what lingers in the unknown. Perhaps what's most striking is how these rituals mirror the landscapes that birthed them. The Tlingit's canoe burials bobbed in coastal mists, the Nabatians carved tombs from desert cliffs, and the Himalayan monks became one with the mountain air. Death, it seems, takes the shape of the world it leaves behind. Yet for all their differences, every culture answered the same unspoken question: how do we keep holding on when someone's gone? So tell us which ritual lingered in your thoughts long after the story ended. Was it the self-mummifying monks, their discipline bordering on divine madness? Or the Chinchoro's painted mummies turning grief into art 7,000 years ago? Drop your reflections below, and if you've ever encountered a burial tradition that moved you, share that too. History's greatest mysteries are waiting in the shadows, and this channel is your lantern. Hit subscribe to keep exploring, because the past has only begun to whisper its secrets. Until then, remember, every grave is a story, and every story is a bridge